You don't want to do that job.
You know?
Back there, like
I want to try to experiment with clear. Like, why I like because there's a little clearness.
Yeah, they're kind of translucent. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to GDC.
So
I
I want to
haven't
see
been in
how I would look in like the clear ones.
8-9 years or so.
I haven't found one
while.
yet.
So it'll be good to go back again.
Yeah.
I think
Finally
that could
catching back up. I
Yeah.
went
without it being like
last year was the year before. I think it was
a
last
joke.
year.
Although now I have a couple of
And
pair.
it was lifting
I
in
guess I could just
October.
switch them on and off.
It was
Good morning, everybody. That's very loud. How's everybody doing this morning? Wow, I bought that. How's the Academy of Scoring Arts doing this morning? There we go. That's what I like to hear. I'm Reuven Herman. I'm the president of the ASA, and thank you all for coming, and thank you all on the live stream for joining us. We've got a really exciting event today, our first event of 2025 after postponing due to the fires. So just a couple quick announcements before we get into the meat of things. First of all, thanks for your patience as we got some tech issues sorted out. We are a volunteer, or we're a nonprofit, and we are a volunteer run, and our board is volunteer. We've got 2 board members over there, Josh and Dell, and our newest board member, Jose, standing there. And then we have Abby Savell over here, who is no longer our newest board member. She's a veteran now. So if you have any questions, well, you should definitely go up and introduce yourselves if we don't already know who you are. We also have a fantastic team of volunteers that helps out with preparing for events. We're looking for some help in marketing. We'll be sending out a newsletter about that in a little bit. So if you have expertise in doing short form videos, that's something we're looking for assistance with. But also preparing for our score studies in terms of doing engravings and mock-ups. So if you don't know about that, check out our website and our Discord channel, which I encourage you to join, whether or not you're a volunteer, because we have ongoing conversation going on there. And we have membership, so we have our free chamber membership tier, but if you are interested in getting more out of your membership, we have our orchestral and philharmonic levels, both of which give you access to our archive of, I think it's like close to 250 videos at this point. So there's a lot of material there. We're also in the process of improving how you can access it. And it also gives you bigger discounts to in-person events. So if you come to a lot of these, definitely worth checking it out, because you could save money and get access to all that extra stuff and pay less money. So kind of win-win. If you are in the LA area or visiting, in-person is best, because we have coffee and pastries from Porto's, and we're going to be having lunch together afterwards. And it's really great to get the chance to talk to each other and hang out together. It's nice to get an excuse to get out of the studio. If not, we are live streaming our events, and as I said, we've got our video archive for members. So I'm going to quickly introduce Kole Hicks here. Kole is a composer, producer, songwriter. He worked for quite a while at Riot Games, working on League of Legends, and got to do some very cool arrangements from orchestral to contemporary, working with various bands and artists. And he's been working on his own stuff, which I have it written down here. Where was it? Oh, you got a Gang Award for Best Original Song. That's pretty impressive. Yes, feel free to clap. And yeah, the Still Here cinematic was really cool. If you haven't seen that, it's on YouTube with League of Legends and Two-Way. Very cool. I think they went a little overboard with their CGI stuff. It's pretty impressive. And Kenshi, which is also more passionate and less 10-cent money behind it, but equally impressive. So sometimes those are the projects that we get to be most proud of, because we know that we did the heavy lifting ourselves and that actually made it work. So without further ado, I'm going to let Kole introduce the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Reuven, and thank you everyone from the ASA. Really excited here to share some feedback, some thoughts, and talk about game music, some of our favorite things to talk about here. I'm Kole Hicks. Like I said, I'm a music producer, a composer. Been very fortunate to work in games for a little while. And I'd like to introduce you to our panelists here, where we're going to provide some thoughts, feedback, and just talk about how we do this, and maybe a little bit about how that can apply to some other people as well. So, next to me is Colin Andrew Grant. He's a Los Angeles-based music designer that spent the last 8 years getting experience a very wide array of jobs in game audio, including dialogue coordinator, composer, and sound designer. He's obtained an undergraduate degree in music at the University of Pittsburgh and professional studies diploma in technology and applied composition from the San Francisco Conservatory of Music. He began his journey at PlayStation as a music intern, and since then been fortunate to work on a number of different titles, including Jedi Survivor, music editor on Halo Infinite, dialogue coordinator on Days Gone, and many, many more. When Colin's not working his day job as a music designer currently at Respawn Entertainment, he's volunteering at the Game Audio Diversity Alliance as their fundraising chair. It's Colin Andrew Grant. Next to Colin is Maclaine Diemer, and he's a Los Angeles-based composer for interactive and traditional media with about 16 years of experience in games. He's worked on some of the highest profile titles across PC and multiple game console generations. In 2023 and 2024, Maclaine was nominated for the Game Music Award at the prestigious World Soundtrack Awards. And some of his notable credits are things like Guild Wars 2, Firmament from the legendary development studio Cyan Inc., makers of Mist and Riven, Harmonix's Rock Band franchise, League, and Amazon Games Studios' first major original title, Crucible. Maclaine. Ayriel Hunt is right after Maclaine, and Ayriel is a creative director currently at 2K, but we also work together at Riot for a little bit, and has led teams to create campaigns that ignite players and gamers and music lovers around the world. She is specifically has more experience in multidisciplinary teams, working also in a background with visual design, has a proven track record of driving creative vision and campaigns for some really big IPs like League, Valorant, and Netflix's Arcane. Ayriel Hunt. All right, well, I think with our introductions out of the way, it would be great to listen to some music and provide some feedback. What we're hoping to do is share things that are going to be useful. We'll talk craft, we'll talk composition, production, but we'll also talk a little bit about, in regards to interactive music, maybe things to keep in mind, some things that are really working quite well, maybe some suggestions, and also from a creative director perspective, maybe what is sticking out, something that could be really helpful when thinking about creating some kind of creative campaign or a marketing thing for a product.
And before we listen, I'm going to read the prompt again so that we know what the prompt was, and we'll also maybe talk a little bit about how to interpret it, because I know there was some confusion and there were some questions that we got about how to do it, and we might see different approaches. So there's an opportunity to score a new game, but before selecting the composer, the studio is requiring demo submissions. They're asking for the following: a full stereo track, an ambient version of this track, and an imminent danger version of this track. All three of these tracks must be exactly the same duration and work, as if they are layers that can crossfade into each other seamlessly, all based on a hypothetically changing game state. And there's an example track that we'll listen to at the end. The full stereo track must contain the following qualities: memorable, sonically unique elements of modern production, represents the feeling of overcoming insurmountable odds. All right, and the tracks are supposed to be 30 to 45 seconds in length, and any genre. So, quick question for our panelists before we listen. Based on your understanding, should the full mix be a combination of the other tracks, or are those three different versions of a similar bass track?
Oh boy. I think it could be either, honestly. I think they should feel related, but it doesn't need to be, just, okay, there's three layers that are muted when it's an ambient version, and then you just push them up. Okay. Because the tempo and the feel could be very different. The tonality could be different, so I think it's okay. They could even be dramatically different because you want to sort of snap people out of that, hey, we're exploring a beautiful, vista versus 10 people are coming to swing their swords at me.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's open, very much to interpretation on almost any level.
Okay, and you surely will agree that often the prompts or the demo solicitations are not clear in terms of their instruction, and part of our job is figuring out what we think they mean.
Yeah.
So part of the challenge.
I do think that it shouldn't be like big fantasy orchestra switches into like club beats, like 4 on the floor music. You know what I mean? It should be sort of genre appropriate, but.
Oh, hang on, let me make a quick change here.
I mean, maybe it should be, I don't know.
All right, should we start listening? And do we have a preference in terms of which order we listen to them to?
I don't think so. If we could maybe start with, it'd be great to hear the stereo, the full, and then after that, if we maybe went eminent and then ambient.
Okay. You want me to show the second ones? No. By the way, we are doing these anonymously. If the person is present and wishes to take credit, they're welcome to, but no need to volunteer. So here's the imminent danger. Finally, the ambient.
Great. Well, I think it'd be nice we can kind of talk about these in any order in particular, but I'm kind of curious, would anybody like to talk maybe a little bit about the change in between all of these tracks and kind of the variation that we had between the imminent danger, the ambient, and the stereo, the full stereo track?
Yes. So I thought that it's very difficult to create 3 different moods with essentially the same chord progression and kind of baseline layer of tonality. They all 3 of them felt distinct, which is very impressive. In my mind, like what I said at the beginning, I would just cheat. It's like the ambient would be one thing, and then the imminent danger and full sort of combat thing would be, those would be related and they'd be completely different because it's like, cool, that snaps you out of it. So I thought it was very effective in that all 3 felt different, and I could feel, the ambient layer, the full mix, right, the intensity of that, and then the kind of imminent danger. Yeah, I thought they did a great job.
Okay. Thanks. And I was wondering also, when speaking to imminent danger, perhaps, Colin, if you could talk a little bit on some of the layers and things that you heard in there.
Yeah, sure. I really like the kind of the escalation in the music. I think one of the big things to think about when going from like an ambient situation to a more bigger combat situation is the density of music. Because I think sometimes people think like, oh, it's bigger, it needs to be denser, and that's not necessarily the case. And I felt they did a very good job of not necessarily going overboard and trying to throw everything into imminent danger. Because there's still, depending on what type of game it is, you still have to consider, okay, there are sound effects happening, there may be dialogue happening during the situation, and going overly dense may make the mix more difficult at the end. So there was a lot of good space, and it still felt that danger.
Absolutely. And I'm curious, Ayriel, as well, listening to these tracks, was there any part of these tracks, whether it be the stereo, eminent, or the ambient, that kind of stuck out, maybe an idea or a particular kind of gesture of some kind, something musical that really kind of stuck out?
Yeah, sure. So when listening to the first one, I was all like, okay, this feels like if I was to create a trailer for this game, right? It feels like I might have a lead-in to it. But depending the game and also what we are trying to do for a greater campaign, lead-ins may not be quite as disruptive as just getting directly into it. So when I heard the second one, which is Imminent Danger with those bats, I was like, oh, that's cute. So potentially I could just use that bat, and if it is a game that is asking for a little bit more like, because I was kind of getting dark dungeon cutesy, So if it's a game that's kind of asking you for the consumer to pay a little bit more attention to it, I think having those bats by themselves could be kind of like a trademark, a thing you can do, kind of like your Inception dong, right? Like, it's like a thing where when you hear it, you can potentially drag them in. And then immediately getting into something with a full track with that pace is something to where, like, now ads are muted, right? Because everyone doesn't want to hear the thing going on. So I could still keep the quickness that I would need in a video asset to get someone's attention, but I could still be kind of thrilling and tonally aligned if the IP is asking for it. So basically, I'm just basically saying I would take all of your stuff to create a thing in the trailer.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Thank you very much for your submission. And any other thoughts?
Yeah, I had a couple more. Of some things that stood out to me. So I thought overall it was great. I do want to make just some notes of a couple, no pun intended, some musical notes. This is like a production thing. So in the full mix, something that's very plucky, like that arpeggio. It's not a piano. It's not a I don't know, the plucky sort of sound. Harpsichord. Geez, I am a musician. It did two things that I thought. One that I thought was good, and one that I would maybe tweak a little bit. One is that just at the point where I was a little sick of hearing that arpeggio going over and over again, it changed feel, which I thought was great. But then it sort of came back, and then it changed again, just as I was also being like, I kind of want to hear something new. So a very simple trick is just do the same pattern with a different sound, right? I think that who knows? There's all sorts of reasons why somebody might have. They were doing this quickly, they just pulled up 3 or 4 patches and then cranked out 30 seconds of something. But I think if you're going back to refine it, that's a great way to just, the last thing you want to do is have someone feel like, God, can this music just calm down and turn it down, right? That's like a nightmare for all of us, is turning the music down. So the more variety you can add, even in those short spaces, the better. And I think that when you have something that's so up-tempo and so fast, like, and up-tempo and a lot of 16th notes, you're going to need a lot more variety because your ear is going to get sick of things very quickly. And I think that kind of applies to all 3 of them. So rather than going to all 3 of them, I'll say that the ambient one, I was kind of like, how are they going to do the same feel in the ambient piece? And I did think it was very effective, but I would have had maybe a little bit more breathing room. So instead of it still being like, bum, 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 I can't remember the melody, but having it go constantly, so let it breathe a little bit, like bum, 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 dun, 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 sort of divide it in half just to give some more room so that when that imminent danger layer or the full mix comes in, it sort of snaps you to attention because you're hearing the same thing but twice as fast. So just a thought.
Yeah, great thoughts.
Also, I like the whistling in the ambient piece. I'm a sucker for whistling.
Yeah, actually, one of the things I wanted to bring up actually was the bats, because whenever you add those kind of like sound effects kind of elements, you have to be kind of careful. And it's very dependent on the game, like how how much you can get away with that. You know, some games, you know, I would definitely want to talk with, you know, sound effect, you know, the sound designers. Is this are there any actual bats in the level like that may come across? Will that cause some confusion? You know, if this is like some kind of like JRPG, you know, turn-based game, that may be a little bit more forgiving of having that because, you know, there's less going on during combat. I would definitely be, if it was some type of looping track, I'd be a little bit careful of having that, possibly in the intro, but, you know, that's a really clear signifier that, like, hey, this is the start of the track again. And if it's the type of game where you may be in this kind of turn-based mode, you know, for a while, you know, you kind of want to get away from these very clear indicators that, hey, we're starting the track again. So I would be careful about having that as part of like a main loop. You know, you may want to, put in the intro, then not have it come back again, or try to maybe even randomize it a little bit. But yeah, those clear signifiers are something you really want to be careful about because they're interesting, but you know, if they keep on coming back over and over again, you know, again, trying to avoid those elements of like, oh, okay, we're back at the beginning, let me just turn this music down again, because I'm hearing the same very clear thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, that's a great note. And would you maybe say a suggestion would be if you separated that out as a layer of some kind, allow the music designer to then implement that in a way in which it's maybe randomized or something?
100%, yeah.
So, thank you all for the feedback. Thank you for the submission. Yes.
My tech team is going to bring me my microphone. So I'll have to keep on better. Get that one with something else. You don't have to I got it.
Oh, sure.
So I've got just one question, a follow-up on that. When you're judging a demo track, are you judging it based specifically on how it would play in the game, or is it sometimes, oh, this feels like the right kind of thing for the game, even if it's not necessarily right in the current mix in the game?
Yeah, I mean, you guys can probably speak a little bit more demo tracks, but, you know, like, I think just kind of getting the mood, the vibe is more important. Like, you know, I can't imagine you'd want the composer to be thinking too much about implementation when it comes to the demo. But I think there's just things to keep in mind, you know, when you're working with a team, when you get that gig, you know, that kind of stuff starts becoming part of the conversation.
Okay. Cool. Oh, there we go. And one other question. So,
Arun, can I just throw something quick in there too? When it depends on who you're submitting to, right? Like, we're, you know, maybe musicians or heard a lot of stuff in this vein and can judge it accordingly. But sometimes you're dealing with creative directors, game directors that have no musical imagination whatsoever, and so they might not be able to hear through production quality of a demo, and that, you know, you might not have access to the best samples or whatever. It might not even be necessary. But I think the less you have to explain, that's going to sound different when in the final thing, you know, don't give them the opportunity to think that, why are you even presenting something to me if this isn't the final thing that you wanted me to hear? If you're dealing, like if I'm hiring a team and somebody's submitting their demo to me, I can listen past the quality of production, but I would usually, you know, maybe even do some of my own production on something before I would ever put it in front of a non-musician, just so they don't be like, well, this doesn't sound as good as what I'm used to hearing in the game or the reference material we sent you.
right.
Yeah.
All right.
Plus 5,000 to that.
Yeah.
Just FYI.
One other technical thing. So this particular track gets cut off a little bit at the end, and we might notice that in some upcoming tracks as well. Is that something that when you're listening to a demo is a red flag, like this person is not paying attention to details, or is it forgivable because we know that it may be something that they had to fade out abruptly, or?
I can answer real quickly. I think if there is a prompt in which they are relatively specific about what is needed, part of that is also kind of an understanding of how much you are paying attention to detail, because when it comes to actually working on the music for a game, having things be exact can be very, very important, especially when you have a very dense interactive music system and many things happening all at once. So I think it's something to listen to, like if, for example, you got a submission, you ask for 30 seconds and it's 1:20, that is something where it's like, it may be great musical material, but it's different than what was requested.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just note, first of all, in terms of production, we're hearing it behind the speakers, so what we're hearing is not necessarily representative of the track itself, or it's, although to be fair, that's often real world situation as well. Also, I'm playing these tracks back without altering them at all, so if some of them we might want to turn up or down, but at least the initial playback is going to be as they were sent. So, just fair warning. All right, let's move on to the next submission. By the way, if whoever after we played their piece, if they want to take credit, feel free. And yeah, we'll move on. So this is the full mix of the next track. We can applaud. Now, I know you're all wondering, okay, what's the imminent danger of that going to sound like? Here it is. And the ambient.
Cool. First thing I wanted to point out is I like how the prompt we get two very different approaches. And it's actually quite nice because it, I think, kind of proves a little bit how subjective all of these things can be. It's like, well, what does sonically unique mean? What does it mean overcoming the odds? What are modern production things? So that's actually pretty interesting and something that I was hoping we'd get to hear a wide variety, and it looks like we already have so far. On the note here, in regards to some of our layering, Colin, I was curious if you could talk a little bit about how different the tracks were harmonically and everything else. Do you think this would be multiple layers that would be able to weave, or it feels like a full swap between the tracks? And just kind of talk about that a bit.
Yeah, sure. I mean, they definitely sound like they could be, because when I hear this, I think of something like, oh, kind of like, New Horizons or some type of like island, type of game, and you go into different regions. It almost feels like that could be, not necessarily built upon each other, but can kind of horizontally transition between each other. And I think it does it very well. I think the one thing I would probably say is that I'd like the ambient version to be a little less active, just to have a little bit more variety between that full track and the ambient. But I really like the transition between the imminent danger and the full track. I like the swapping out of what was taking charge of the melody. It felt like a very distinct like area of a game you might hear.
Some great notes. And Ayriel, I'm curious, talking about melody and textures, and now this one being quite different from the last track, what in particular kind of stood out to you on this one?
Two things, which, look, don't butcher me. I am not a musician by trade, so I am one of those, plebe creative directors where you're going to have to, bear with me on things. It's definitely earwormy. Like, it was a vibe. So I would put this on TikTok, and I would probably put the initial version on TikTok, and I would just spam the shit out of it until it like caught on, because it is that type of earworm. And then it felt very Nintendo-like because at the end, it felt similar to when the Switch does its like quintessential click. And so I was all like, oh, that's cute. Like if I was making a Nintendo product, I would have a easy segue into that. Like I could play off of that. So I don't know. I think there's something interesting here to where I potentially can do some like Rihanna umbrella shit and just keep inundating people with that until it just became like an elevator song that you were just like, where did that come from? And I think that's kind of fun to play with. So yeah.
Yeah, great notes. Is that ending kind of thing? Yeah. Cool. Maclaine, any thoughts in particular about any of these, including production or composition?
Yeah, so I agree that it was very Nintendo-like. It really reminded me of Adventure Island. I'm old, and so playing Adventure Island on the original Game Boy was like many Saturdays were spent doing that. So it had that island vibe like you were talking about. I loved the changes. I love the A and B section. There was a couple of chords where I thought, oh, it's like tickles that little musician part of my brain that's like, they didn't just, it's not diatonic. I do think this is the challenge of doing something so short, kind of what Colin was saying on the last one. It was so clear to me when it was going to loop back around that I would have liked maybe a little bit flat in terms of the form, just so that you can get lost in the loop rather than feeling like, cool, we've done 32 bars, let's go back to the top. I also thought that the ambient one was probably a little too active, mostly just the conga samples, right? Like, I would have liked to hear it without that. I thought that the bass line was creating enough energy, and everything but the congas had this kind of like warm, low-passed, like fuzzy quality to it, and the congas are so bright. So even if you want to leave those in there, from a production standpoint, what I would do is just roll the treble off, right? Like, I don't trust any sample maker to make a sample that sounds good out of the box, and that includes the expensive one. So I EQ. People are like, don't EQ and compress an orchestra. Don't EQ. It's like, no, do it. Add distortion, roll off the treble, roll off the low end. Like, get rid of all that stuff. Produce it like you're producing a record, essentially, because if you're not recording it all live, then the rules go out the window, I think. And so rolling off some of that high end on the congas might have had them settle into the mix a little bit more and revealed some of that kind of bubbly, fuzzy stuff that was underneath it.
Let me just play a few seconds of that just so we can...
Sure, yeah.
Take the congas out.
Yeah, or, if mimic it as if you were recording it live. Like if I was a conga player and we're recording that live, in that intro, yeah, I'm the feature, right? I'm the one setting the tone for everything. And as soon as the melody comes in, as a player, I would probably back off dynamically a little bit. So you can mimic that either with the volume automation or roll some of the EQ off the high end.
By the way, I also just want to experiment with transitioning from the full mix to the imminent danger just to see how that works. So it's no crossfade, just going directly from one to the other. Too bad.
And I would even, okay, Sorry, I had more notes. I would, hearing all these things, all the elements are great. I would put that conga in the danger aspect to give the percussion a different feel from the full mix. I'd probably get rid of the snapping because everything else in the danger mix felt dangerous. Like the tonality changes, the synth lead sound changes. The snapping feels very much like dishwasher detergent commercial to me. So like, get rid of that. It's too happy. Although I did like how it ended on a major chord, almost as if it was mimicking like, cool, you beat the boss, victory stinger. So that I thought was a good.
What, you think a dishwasher is a safe place to be?
Well, it's just sort of happy, sunshiny. You know what I mean? It's like those commercials where they drop the drop of soap in it and like all the grease disperses. That's just think of
just
snapping.
imagine like the violence inside the dishwasher. That's-
Very hot, yes.
Yeah, real quick, I think as we're listening to more of these tracks and we're talking about imminent danger and ambient layers and things like that, you were talking about how we can kind of treat some of these different elements, whether they be used throughout in the stereo. One of your suggestions was a low pass. I think adding space and reverb certainly helps a lot in the ambient. Using transient plugins as well. So if you have something where the transient's really pokey, like the percussion there, maybe it's something where you actually roll that off a little bit. But yeah.
Do you have a particular favorite transient plugin?
Isotope is good. Isotope transient, whatever. They update them like every 4 months, it seems like. But yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, I use just Transient Master.
Cool. Shall we move on to the next?
Yes.
Was that the full mix?
That was the full
We're doing the
mix.
same order, full, danger,
Yeah.
and ambient. Okay.
Here's danger. Sorry,
That sounds familiar.
let's try the right danger. And finally, ambient, which I'll just note is shorter in length, the actual WAV file than the others.
Great. Also, very, very different. Let's talk, Colin, come back to you again. I think it would be great if you could talk a little bit about the different layers that we're hearing here and It's also been kind of interesting, I think, over the past few we've listened to, the imminent danger one actually being a bit more dense than the stereo, and maybe whether or not that needs to be the case in your experience.
Yeah, I mean, there's no specific rules on how it should be done, and depending on the game, it may be completely necessary. You look at some of these, bigger, action adventure games. Some of them have very, big orchestral denser tracks, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. You just have to look at the situation. Like in this kind of situation, I liked, I think their take on imminent danger was like, much more dangerous maybe some of the other tracks we're listening to. And if this was some sort of like, running into like a boss battle from traveling situation, that big switch up may be necessary to really sell how dangerous it is. You look at a game like, Elden Ring, and like their, big boss combat tracks are like massive, and like it works. I think the one thing I'd probably say is, just kind of looking at the differences between the layers would be the ambient layer kind of felt more to me like a low combat than ambient type of situation. And I'd also point out that, when I'm looking at like ambient music for a game, they had that pad, that drone, and I'd always suggest, try to make sure you keep some movement in that, rather than just having like, you kind of heard a little bit, but I'd like a little bit more variety in how that kind of, moves, whether that's volume, whether that's, texture. You just kind of want to usually avoid just that plain, just a drone just kind of going, because that gets kind of exhausting a little bit. You want to keep that movement.
Yeah, that's a great point, and perhaps using even something like an LFO for additional movement or something like that. Great note. Maclaine, I'm curious, with the ostinato that we heard here, if you could talk a little bit about how that makes an appearance in each of these tracks, and just a little bit about ostinatos in general.
Yeah, so I was going to point that out, that I really liked how it was in the strings, in the full mix, and then in the synth, in the ambient mix. I don't know if it's the same exact part, but a similar idea of a kind of through line of an arpeggio, ostinato, kind of as glue. I was a little worried hearing the strings played in the full mix that it's maybe not so idiomatic. It definitely seemed very, at that tempo. Now, I'm not a string player, so if somebody in the audience plays violin, they're like, no, I learned that in my Suzuki book too, or whatever. But to me, I was kind of like, it seems like a lot. And it goes on for maybe a little too long just doing the same thing. So that's when the chord changes, when it modulates the first time, again, I'll probably say this a bunch today, that's a great time to just take the same part and give it to a different instrument. So in that situation, I might have dialed up a more aggressive synth sound, like the same sound in the ambient layer, but just like opened up the filter a little bit or put some distortion on it, had it play the same part. And then the other thing is when you're, now it's easy with samples, but in a real world recording situation, which for me, I try to mimic what it would sound like in the real world as much as possible sometimes. When you're playing something that fast, it can be really tough to lock in, right? And so I even felt a little bit with short string samples, they don't start right on the grid. So all of a sudden you're like, cool, this is a great part in isolation. When you throw it in with all these other things, and there's a bunch of rhythms, they're all sort of clashing, it can start to feel mushy. And I think it even felt that way a little bit in the danger layer, not in the string ostinato, but in some of the percussion. It just felt a little off the grid, and I was kind of like, it was robbing me of the power of especially the low end, like bump, 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 which is such a strong rhythm. Let that be the feature instead of like, all this crazy stuff going up top. And I felt a little bit of that in the strings too, doing that ostinato part.
Great, thank you, Maclaine. Ayriel, I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about, now we have even different textures here with orchestra and choir and everything, some of the things that kind of stood out to you about this track.
Well, there was something that was really fun in the beginning. Like in my notes, the first part of it, I was like, ooh, Severance. And I feel like that's a vibe, right? Like everyone right now is like, ooh, yeah, that one sound that's vibrating a lot, but it's by itself. It's like there's a level of hollowness in it, I guess. I'm using the wrong words. Don't judge me here. Anywho, I was like, ooh, Severance. And then it kind of like locked in, and I was like, oh, this feels very familiar. So I kind of felt like, oh, I don't know, that hurt me a little bit. But then that ambient, I was like, oh, shit, there's something like really here, because I feel like it played into what I was liking about the beginning of the full one, to where I was feeling that Severance, like, oh, by the way, I love horror shit. So like, of course, it's going to be something I like to listen to. So I was like, oh, there's a lot of potential here, but I felt like I was like, oh, I just want this to breathe. Like, I just want you to let these strings or let whatever is happening here just really take up space, and maybe for an appropriate long time, to really like get into that vibe and that mood, especially in something that feels like the structure of it feels familiar. If you're saying like, oh, it feels like one of those action adventure games, right? Well, action adventure games, we can say that because it's like, oh, you hear the sounds of that all the time. You know what it is. It's very, it's an iconic, soundscape. So how do you stand out amongst all the action adventure games? How do you plug it if music is a thing? And so I think ambient was like the best course of being all like, if I'm releasing a trailer, if I'm releasing something like a snippet of it, then that would be something where I would want to take advantage and potentially do something different, something subversive with it. So I saw a lot of potential in that whole entire like intro. And I'm like, I want more of that in this particular situation.
Yeah, that's a great note, and I think talking a little bit about some of the unique sound and ambient specifically, or some kind of high percussion that feels like it has delay on it. It's like that's also something that stood out to me. It's like, oh, that feels very appropriate. It's a different treatment from what I had heard before, and it's something like you were talking before about the other track, kind of earwormy. Yeah. Any other notes or thoughts or questions?
What are you talking about in the full mix?
This would be the ambient. It's a high
okay.
percussion, little delayed thing.
Yeah, like that whole entire intro, I'm all like, oh, that's a vibe. You know what I'm saying? And there's like a level of retro inside of that too. But it feels like everything is kind of like rushing to kind of like get in and like be like, I'm a vibe. And it's like, I don't know, girl, I see you. Like, let the first set of, goodness, like take the part. Like, let's linger in this a little bit. And if I'm also thinking about ambient, I'm thinking like, it feels further away, like in my head, you know what I'm saying? And a lot of this is like approaching it, but I'm like, no one's really like taking it there to where things feel really offset, and it's kind of like, ooh, now it's like kind of playing. Again, I don't have a music background. I'm just giving you the feels from a layman here, but I think there was just a lot of potential for me personally in the ambient.
In some ways, that's the most valuable perspective, because often it's non-musicians who are judging these demos. I just wanted to point out, because the prompt did say they should be able to switch back and forth, and I'm just going to quickly play the intro of the full mix and then the imminent danger, and specifically pay attention to how long each intro sounds. And then this is the imminent danger. So if you try cross-fading from one to the other, that's not going to work out so well.
Yeah, it feels a little bit shorter. It's one where perhaps if it's a full, two stereo tracks, just kind of one replacing the other, there's a little bit more, but agreed, if there's an intro of some kind, having that line up exactly, otherwise you have the start of one a little bit early, which could feel a little off. Now, if it happens to be like you have a music system, perhaps something you can talk about, where the transition's on the beat and you have that actually mapped to a tempo, then okay, maybe you do that, and then it's just like, oh, it purposefully feels a little bit different. And that's okay too. It's more about the intent and whether or not it's like, oh yeah, this is intentionally, we're just offsetting it a little bit to actually draw attention to it. If it wasn't, then that's something to take into consideration as well.
Cool. All right, let's move on. And just to preempt a question that we got online, after we go through these submissions, we'll talk a little bit more about game scoring.
Yes.
Because there's one question that pertains to that, but less applicable to the demos. Okay, so here too we have different length files. So, Jose, did you bring the volume up?
It panned hard to the right. I don't think that was a line.
Okay, I don't see it in the track, but these are very low volume. So I'm actually, yeah, I'm gonna boost them all by, let's try 12 dB. Let's try 18 dB. Okay, this should be a little bit. So you can put the volume back where it was. But yeah, these were very very low gain. So here's the imminent danger version. And ambient.
Cool. Lots to talk about here. I think it would be interesting to actually talk, maybe Ayriel, will go to you first, talking about some of these textures and things we're hearing, and especially in that ambient track that we heard at the end.
Yeah, so I will say there is a part of me from like 1 to 3 that I wrote down, I was like, oh, it feels like a dark pixel cyber-like fantasy, like a pixel game cyber fantasy. But then once I started listening to the imminent and getting down into the ambient, I was like, oh no, this is feeling like RoboCop Terminator. Like there's a whole entire sci-fi vibe that feels like it's coming here. So there's a part of me that was like a little lost as into all 3 of these like living together, because it was evoking different type of games in my mind and different types of way to visualize those games in my mind. But I do think actually imminent might have been my favorite one, just because it felt a little bit like RoboCop, and there was this like these like zzz leaders that were going on. I'm not hitting that sonically correctly, but there were these interesting like scan line or whatever where I was like, oh, that's fun to me, that's interesting to continue to kind of play with, or to kind of coin, like bring that type of I don't want to say instrumentation, but maybe instrumentation into like the game or into other elements, like baking that into like UI and stuff like that, so you can get even a closer tether from like this piece of work into more aspects of the game to make it all feel like together, it's living in its own world. So there's like a lot of world building that is happening, but I will say that first one, the full one, felt a little disjointed from the last 2 that felt to me like we were in the same type of game.
Yeah, great thoughts. And on the kind of idea of sound and maybe using sound design, I know, Colin, you mentioned a little bit earlier about one of the tracks. Maybe you could talk a little bit about some synth sounds, textures, and how that might work alongside sound design or things like that in a game.
Yeah, I think the big difference between this and I think the other track we heard is that this is, more just like designing the sound itself. It's not trying to replicate something that might exist in the world. And so I think there's a lot more freedom to experiment with those sounds. Especially I really liked the ambient track. I really liked how the first 2 halves, the first half and the second half had very different elements of it, and it gave space for these different sounds, which is definitely something you want to hear. I think for something that's more ambient is, that evolution that happened. It's not a striking difference, but it still feels like the music is moving and doing something, and is bringing different elements into it that maybe the player may not like consciously be like, oh wow, that's something very new and different, but they kind of feel that as they're playing the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great thoughts. And Maclaine, I'm kind of curious if you could talk a little bit about, just as a composer, demoing and things. We had heard certain things in regards to volume and even a hard stereo pan and things like that, assuming they were in the track and it perhaps wasn't technical difficulties or things like that. Could you talk a little bit about some of the things that you try to keep in mind when pitching, like a demo, things that are a little bit more technical like that?
Yeah, so I'm sure we've all heard the term loudness war, right, in regards to pop music over the last 20 years. But I think that also exists in pitching demo stuff. I mean, I have, when I'm writing something, whether it's a demo or the final product, I'll usually keep an uncompressed, sort of unmastered, but loud, like a good mix version of that set aside. And then the one I send is like almost like a sausage, you know? In fact, I was talking to Stephen Barton, one of the composers for the Jedi Fallen Order / Survivor series, and he was saying he basically has this one plugin that he just absolutely slams everything just for demo reels. That's it, because people listening to it want to hear it loud. They want to be excited. I know that as musicians, we want to preserve the dynamics and all of our beautiful textures and the balance of everything, but you also have to think about the context in which it might appear in the game, which means there's going to be VO, there's going to be sound effects, there's going to be world ambience, right? UI sound effects. And so the dynamics you save for the soundtrack, you kind of want it to, you know, for instance, if I was a creative director and I had a workable demo with no music and I was listening to a bunch of submissions, I might put them on the stereo while I'm playing the game, right? And set it to a level that I think would be appropriate to hear it where I would want to hear it in the final mix. And if you're quieter than everybody else, or the coolest parts of your demo are buried beneath, you know, loud percussion or something that really pokes out because it's, you know, high end tends to poke out more at low volumes, then I might just be like, yeah, it's not giving me the feeling I want. Next, you know. So I do think that is an important consideration. Is you know, don't make it. I don't want to hear the compression. This is very technical, so stop me if this is boring, but. You know, I don't want it to be so squashed that it sounds lifeless. The famous example is Metallica's Saint Anger album, which is pretty lifeless sounding. In fact, never mind. Ask me afterwards about Saint Anger. But there's a funny story that involves Rock Band specifically, which is what I started my career working on, in that album. But anyway, that's what I would do, is try to at least get it to a reasonable volume level and maybe compress it a little bit to shave off some of the dynamics.
Jose, can we switch to mirroring my screen for a second? I just want to show the waveform, because Maclaine, you were talking about what the waveform looks like. I can pivot my computer so you guys can see it, but maybe.
I can see it.
Yeah, you get an idea.
Yeah.
This is the original waveform, and that's how it compares to the other submissions. So you can really see, I mean, I boosted it by 18 dB to get it where it's looking about the same as the rest. So definitely something to be aware of as you're exporting, is just where your meters are at.
Yeah, and sorry, I was going to say, one of the things I do all the time when I'm working on demos is I check it on, you know, this is normal, check it on multiple stereo systems. So I'll bounce out a stereo file, put it on my phone, and then go listen to it on the drive home. And if I have to turn the volume knob all the way up in my car stereo compared to even just a podcast, right, which is just voices, then that means I need to make it louder. So I use, you know, reference tracks of things that I want it to feel like or sound like all the time. Don't just listen in your perfect kind of studio environment.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think talking about demos a little bit more, usually the first 10, 15 seconds are critically important, and part of that is volume. It's certainly musical material as well, and having some kind of gesture, an earworm of some kind that is recognizable, but it's also making sure that it is competitively loud, I guess you'd say. Any other thoughts on this track?
I just wanted to add one more question, which it would be great to get a response to. So you haven't been seeing, and we haven't been giving the names of these tracks as they were named. But this one actually did not have full mix and Imminent Danger. It had Battle Loop A and Battle Loop B in parentheses low health, which I classified as Imminent Danger, and then ambient.
Oh.
So how important is it to name tracks? If you're evaluating demos, do you care about what the track is called? I mean, both in terms of, this one is called Miramar, but does it matter what the name is? How important is it to be consistent?
And talk about naming convention.
It's probably more important for you, yeah.
I can speak to that a little bit, yeah. So, I can't necessarily speak, a lot of what I'm saying comes after, the demo process. You have the gig, you're working on stuff, because that's usually when I come into the equation. I will say that, the preference is always, keep to the name conventions. We work sometimes with, 3 hours, 4 hours plus, worth of music, lots of different tracks we're getting, and our ability to organize that and keep organized both, in our folder structures as well as in the game engine itself is very important. And so the less friction we get of having to, okay, they sent me this track again, it sounds great, I have to now rename it or whatever, I have to keep track of version, 3 versus version 12. It makes it easier on our side. Of course, there's always going to be people who are the best at it, and there's some leeway. If you have someone like me on the other side, I'll be like, okay, I'll just rename it. But the less difficult it is to have to figure out what this is, having to rename things, the easier the whole process is going to be. And when you're working with dozens of assets over the course of a couple of years, sticking to that naming convention is really important. So I would definitely, if I'm starting to work with someone and I'm seeing that they're not really sticking to that, I'd be a little bit cautious, because it's there's so many assets we're working with. We need to have some order.
Yeah, and I would say in the demoing process, part of this being on the prompt is similar to the duration. It is something that I think a lot of people will keep an eye out for, because just like you had mentioned, it can be critically important later when you're dealing with hours of music, multiple stems, multiple version types, all these different things. So attention to detail in the demo phase is very nice.
Cool. I don't think we've had anybody take credit just yet. So the offer still stands.
Yeah,
but,
be brave.
No pressure.
But no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. Everything's been sounding great, by the way. Yeah,
Yeah.
all positive vibes.
And now for Imminent Danger. finally, ambient.
Cool. Maclaine, I'd like to start with you, maybe talking a little bit about the intensity between these and our stereo track feeling perhaps like the full combat track, imminent danger perhaps being in the middle, and ambient, and kind of how those all work together theoretically if they are to stack up kind of like that.
Yeah, I was going to say that now that we're sort of at the halfway point of our submissions, I think that generally speaking, on more of these than not, the imminent danger loop has felt more like what I would expect the full-on like combat loop to be. I think that, and a lot of these, including on this one, the ambient layer feels like what I want the imminent danger layer to feel like, right? I think ambience is a really tricky thing for composers to nail because we're sitting there listening on repeat over and over to our own music and we get so bored, and if it just feels like it's this thing that's drifting along, it can get boring. We want it to be exciting. We like writing exciting music. But you have to, again, understand the context that it's going to appear in. Somebody might only hear it once per hour, you know, as they're exploring, or once every half hour. And you really want to make sure that the dividing line between the lowest state of music, ambient music, versus that next jump up, which in this case would be imminent danger, is stark enough that you feel that difference. And the ambient has to be truly ambient, it has to settle into the full mix of the game at everything at its sort of ideal level. So pretty much across the board, every single one of these ambient tracks, I would dial back even more. Less harmonic movement, less rhythmic movement, and then take some of those elements and put them into the imminent danger layer and keep that as like a true medium, you know, intensity level. That's probably my biggest comment, I think, on these three in particular and all of them. And then one thing I will say, too, about this is that, you know, to me, the full mix and the imminent danger, it kind of felt like the same track, just minus one level of intense sort of percussion or high, you know, I'd have to hear it again. But it kind of felt exactly the same, right? Like, to me, imminent danger doesn't mean blasting trumpets and low blah horn stuff. It's got to be, that's maximum. It's got to be a little bit more medium. And then because the ambient layer was all synths, which I loved, I was like, oh, okay. It was kind of what I was talking about at the beginning, where, oh, I don't want to hear something that's full orchestral and then like a synth version, and that's exactly what this is. But I loved it. I loved this sort of Blue Man Group tube, like do thing. I would want to hear more of that in the other layers to connect them more, so they felt, you know, or a couple more orchestral instruments in that ambient layer.
Right, a little bit more connective tissue between ambient and
yeah. Musically, they're connected. They're obviously very similar, but sonically very different.
Awesome, thank you. Ayriel, could you talk a little bit about maybe these tracks, and in particular if one or elements of one kind of stood out to you?
You know, I'm going to be honest, I kind of agree, but of course from my perspective of like, the first two sounded the same, full and imminent sounded the same. So I will, which I don't know if this is bad for me to say, I like backed off. Like I kind of like zoned out a little bit because it was like, well, these two things are sounding the same, and also the full one felt a little bit more like imminent. I was like, the brief is like not briefed. And so I kind of like backed out of this a little bit, but then came back into it with ambient because ambient did feel so distinctly different with like the different tonalities that were coming in there. But I will say, if there would have been interesting of approach to where I was like, okay, well, if that full one was sounding very like combat-like, you know what I mean? Like it was kind of pumping and going. I was like, if they hit imminent with like some extra shit, like that shit was just like going off the rails or something like that, I would be like, oh, that would have been wild, you know what I'm saying? Like that would have been a crazy, you know, perspective. So I do think there was opportunity here to potentially like do something interesting with this prompt in those two spaces that could have been like, oh, you know, nice, GG. So yeah.
Yeah, great thoughts. It's just kind of the variation, similar to what you were talking, Maclaine, between the different tracks. It's like, well, if one was perhaps full combat, maybe scaling it down a bit, or maybe one's a bit more melodic, or harmonic changes like we've heard in other tracks. Yeah, cool.
Yeah. But I will, sorry not to interrupt, but I will note, as a person in industry, the way I just went through that is how I am doing it in my job. You know what I'm saying? So if I am parsing through stuff and you have not met the brief, which has been a conversation here, or something has happened to where it feels a little off kilter, then it looks like I just took you out the running, right? Like I just did not give you a shot anymore. I may have not even made it to the last one, you know what I mean? I don't necessarily do that because I'm down to like ride and clown. I know there's certain things, but just kind of be aware other people might be, you're going through thousands, hundreds of these type of stuff. If these two just sounded the same, I'm all like, well, I'm not listening anymore, you know, because what else are you going to give me? So being mindful of those certain things, I think, is important in a line that has been, you know, stated here.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, is depending on what it is, if it's a demo submission for just one track, well, you can know what order they will listen to that. But if there is a submission in which there's three, it could be listened to in any order. And sometimes I think there can be a leaning into one track with like, oh, this is where I'm going to save all the good stuff. But if they save that for the end, they may never get to it. So yeah, it's a tricky one to balance, but some good thoughts. Colin, is there anything that you wanted to talk about these tracks as well?
Yeah, I think kind of talking about the whole like maximalist, you know, density. I think this is a good example of, you know, that full mix. There was a lot happening. It was very big. It kept on kind of changing. And it sounded really good, but I found myself struggling to hook onto anything. And this may be one of those examples where you may want to present some sort of very clear, you know, ID'd melody up front, something that I'd be like, okay, that's what this track, or maybe it's a very unique sound, something that brings me in. Because, like, if, for example, we were going to expand this to like a 3-minute track that you would, you know, present for like combat music. What I'm hearing here may be like minute, you know, starting at like the 1-minute track where we've already established the melody. Now we're looking for, you know, something that will play back after that. But I think for like a demo purpose, I'd want something a little bit more catching in the very beginning to make it stand out. Because the music sounds really good. It's just I found it difficult to latch on to anything specifically in that track.
Yeah, some good thoughts, some very good thoughts. Any questions in particular, Reuven?
Not really. I just want to latch on to what you said, because to me, the one thing that stood out is how dense it was. There's a lot of musical content, which I know I'm guilty of in writing my own music, but sometimes it's nice to give a little bit of space in between to allow us to the listener to latch onto something to get the idea. So I think this might, and Maclaine, I think you mentioned that in a previous track where sometimes it's good to leave some space in between ideas, and I think that this is probably one of those places where using these ideas but leaving more space is going to be more effective.
Yeah, I was thinking that with the low brass just got to the point where I was like, you better give them a break. Again, I'm thinking about it like as if it's happening live. I'm like, you know, they're going to really rebel. Like, you might get 2 takes of this and they say, we're not doing that anymore. and then it would change. I'm like, okay, phew, they're not going to, you know, throw their stands down and say, we're not doing this anymore. But the one thing, and again, this is across a bunch of the tracks as well. There's the percussion is unnaturally active. Again, I'm just thinking about it if we're doing it live. Like if it's just ticky-tacks and synth things going on, sometimes it's fine to just have it go the whole time. But it can be so unbelievably active that it's exhausting, especially because it's high, right? And the register of it is very high. You've got, you know, your trumpets, orchestra, the low brass and low toms and big, you know, or timpani and taikos and stuff. But there's always this layer of really high active, like ticky-tack stuff, which to me is just like bugs in my ear going zzz, zzz, you know, and I need a break from that eventually. And I think if you're going to have somebody put the human element on it and record it, you got to give them a break. Their hands can't be doing this for 2 minutes straight, you know. I'm looking at Abby back there and thinking,
I was just going to say,
yes.
Abby, I'd love to hear your take on that.
I can definitely play for 2 minutes straight. Andrew, but I do agree that as a listener over here and being very sensitive to percussion, that that you either have to do it like that and then bring it down in the mix, right, and mix the part itself so it's maybe not so grating on the treble side, but I think also like working with the percussionist and saying, listen, I want something that's running up here at the top, but like instead of just writing 16th notes, there can be some other pattern that you could recommend, or like, you know, like I want you to like evolve the part a little bit as you go. Let them kind of, if they're experienced enough, they'll be able to take the wheel and know how to make it like not annoying.
Yeah. Abby, by the way, runs LA Percussion Rentals for people that don't know, and has a very cool website and YouTube channel, and you should check it out.
And
hire them.
Instruments.
Yeah.
Cool. Should
Yeah,
we,
thank you for
move
your
on?
submission.
All right, I think we'll do one more and then take a break for everybody to refill their coffee cups and.
Get to the best one later.
Yeah. All right. There we go.
Very cool. Maclaine, I'd like to start with you, and maybe you talking a little bit about the treatment of some of the different elements we're hearing throughout, and specifically in the ambient, like what else maybe could be done to even make that variation wider?
Good question. Well, I really like the ambient one. I will say that this one felt the most like what I would expect an ambient track to be. It had a ton of space, which I liked, and it had just the one element to sort of drive things along in the bass line. First of all, I was immediately smiling when I heard this one. It reminded me so much of like mid to late 90s PC game. I wrote down Earthworm Jim and Toe Jam and Earl. I don't know if anybody remembers those games, but there's like a very specific vibe to those that this reminded me of a lot. I don't know what I would have done differently in the ambient layer other than, you know, maybe set the tone with that active sort of bass part, but not had it be so regular. You know, dun 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 dun, and then it's like nice and sparse. Do do. You know, just something, just like set the tone, because that rhythmic element is so important, but then don't lean into it so much so that when we hear it in the other two sections, it does kind of keep propelling us through it. I will say again that that imminent danger layer felt like should have been the full mix, and that the full mix should have been I don't know if it felt like dangerous, but it just, you know, whenever I hear big heavy guitars, and it just felt more intense. So that's, to me, is like, that's the full mix, that's the whole thing. So maybe there's some middle ground between the ambient layer and what was presented as the full mix for what could have been the imminent danger, if that makes sense.
Right.
But I think there were some good things, like Colin was mentioning about how when it starts, there's like a little do, like just a little earworm hook that I'm immediately in, like, okay, this is cool, I'm having fun. So, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
Actually speaking, Colin, if you wanted to talk a little bit, I'm kind of curious, specifically our variation in instruments and instrumentation between the stereo and the imminent danger track. Kind of just in general what you thought about that and how that might appear in game.
Yeah, I mean, again, same thing, like Instantly Smile, like I got like real Hades vibe from this, and which is like one of my favorite game soundtracks. I think the difference, like this would definitely be something that I can easily see, you know, going between the different layers. I loved the added elements in the imminent danger. I really like the guitar elements. It felt to me more like two elements of combat. You know, for me, it felt like the full mix was like maybe like a low level combat, and then imminent danger is more like, you know, just a higher level of combat is how I probably would have them go back and forth between. And then kind of the same thing, like the lower, I really liked the ambient track. It really gave a lot of space. If I was gonna say anything, I would probably maybe just like, not a lot, like, but maybe bring some of the synth, you know, pad elements up a tiny bit when they come in. Like, not a lot. And of course, you know, the way we're listening to, you know, maybe that's more apparent on like headphones. But it was really that, and then I think the one thing that pulled me out a tiny bit, like a very small bit, was that cowbell in the imminent danger. I would have maybe preferred that to be a little bit lower in the mix sometimes.
Wait a minute, are you saying less cowbell?
Only slightly.
The pendulum is finally swinging the other way.
But yeah, I liked the initial hitting of it, and then maybe later on in the track, pulling it back a tiny bit. But again, it's a good earworm. It catches me. There's just so many parts about this that I was like, that would get stuck in my head, and I'd want to go back to the track and listen to it again. Like, really good job.
Great thoughts. Ayriel, I'm curious, been mentioning a lot about vibes and things. Could you talk vibes on this track and kind of what stood out to you?
I mean, definitely funky. It definitely had, like, I really enjoyed the bass inside of there, which I was like, oh, that would make me want to do something on TikTok. And activating, you know, the community to, like, maybe riff, like you were kind of talking about those spaces that you were hearing, to where maybe you could, I'm using these words, do some free form, you know, intersections. Like, I could see people kind of jamming out to this just because it had that, like, consistency where you could kind of go off and do your thing. So I really enjoyed that aspect of it a lot, which made me was like, oh, like, let's activate the community in a really big way, and maybe we can get different variations of that to where we could integrate it into stuff, UGC content or whatever, parody it back into the game, maybe, you know, put a Spotify list up, I don't know. But it was definitely funky, really high vibes, like, it was definitely a bit of an earworm type of situation. Oh my gosh, an elevator TikTok, but a bunch of just bassists going at it and doing their thing. That could be crazy.
Can you explain what UGC is?
Oh, user-generated content. So basically anything that you put out there in the world, people being and asking you to put it on their channels.
Which is like kind of, that's how things get marketed these days, right? Is you want, you want people doing duets on TikTok, or like,
yes,
duets on duets on duets, right?
Yes. I mean, I don't know how many of you actively use TikTok or any other type of social, but if you're on TikTok right now, you're literally seeing your favorite creators shill, like, ASOS, whatever brands that are kind of out there, and there's always like that little middle of like sponsor right there, and you're like, oh man, damn, you too. Good or bad, you know what I'm saying? But like, it's definitely a thing. Some brands do it really well, like Telfar. Like their whole entire proposition, their whole entire ethos is based off of their community that they've generated to kind of speak back to them and kind of fuel their kind of like moment, And so there's people who do it really, really well, and there's just some people who are just understanding where we are in life with consumerism, and they activate in that way. So everyone loves anyone who kind of like participates, because it is a avenue to go to ignite a community and kind of get people who feel familiar in different places to kind of vouch for the thing that you're doing.
Yeah, that's some great thoughts, and I actually kind of want to stay with you, Ayriel, and a little bit talk this about. You have mentioned multiple times so far about finding something that could activate the community, be on TikTok, things like that. When you're listening to a demo track or any kind of music in general, is there anything in particular that you are listening for which will make you be like, all right, I need to find this thing because, I can build something around that? Is it consistent? Does it change every time? Just curious as a creative director, how you think about that.
I think it's really inconsistent, to be truthfully honest. I think if I was to take my job right now and what I would do in sourcing music, it is trying to fit a vibe for whatever game or moment I'm looking to do. So it may not be like there's a funky bass line here, or there's some lyrics that feel so appropriate to this. Like it's whatever fits in that moment. But if something is being identified in your product, that music is like a pillar, it's like we want to do something more with that, then I think I kind of, become attuned to being on like, well, what can we do more? Like, what is a song evoking out of you to kind of like put it in play? And then sometimes I think a lot of us kind of just sit on a treasure trove of music to where we have this wish list. Like, low key, I want to work with Rico Nasty, not only because of the music that she puts out, but because of the artist that she is. So I just keep a compendium of things where I'm all like, I can't wait for the right beat for me to bring this one track up. Like, my boss literally is like, yo, I know the song that has to go into this game. You know what I'm saying? And like, they are very hard-fetched, and it's like, it's because of the tonality of the song, like the way the orchestra is being played, it feels so right for the way this game is, like that's how we kind of pick and choose what we think is like really awesome, or the things that we think can like make it. So it's always changing. I think it's just kind of like, as you're seeing my live reactions to this, if this was like, hey, we just want to find music to do like really cool shit with for like whatever type of moment that we're doing, then I'm all like, this is how I would judge those songs, or this is what I would pick out to be appropriate to meet the brief that we're kind of looking for.
Perfect, thank you. Any other questions?
I just wanted to chime in with a couple quick things. First is I love the use of Jew's harp, and then I think in the Imminent Danger, it switched or there was an effect on it that made it sound like a vocoder, but not an instrument that gets a whole lot of use and really stood out. I mean, Maclaine, you said brought a smile to your face. And I definitely felt the same way. It's like, this. Oh, there.
Let's go.
Great job. It sounded great, but it was a lot of fun. The only other thing I was going to say, and this also aligns with what Maclaine was saying about the bass maybe being too active in the ambient version. My thought immediately when I heard it was, I wish the bass didn't come in right away the second bar, and either leave it silent or even have like a 1 bar delay where it's like filtered. So I'll just play the ambient version. And then just sort of like a faint echo. Dun, 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 dun.
Delay or verb.
Right. Other than that, I mean, I loved it, but it felt like it could have been even sparser and been even more effective as an ambient track.
That's all to taste too, right? Like it could need that, but if this was, say, like a mobile game where you might only hear the music for 30 seconds, having it be a little more active is not the worst thing in the world. And also, there's so much space in that ambient track. This is maybe a fun sort of playground for a more interesting, like procedurally generated version. That track is so simple in that it's just like one, the chords don't really change. It's just that bass riff and then some connective tissue. you could record 10 variations of a little bass fill, and then have it be completely randomized over a stereo bed of a synth playing and that little like triangle percussion sort of sound. And then it could be 30 seconds and you never hear it the same way twice, which is sort of the fun aspect of playing with games and interactive music systems.
But the other thing that's so effective about that bass line is it's so groovy that you don't, like, the beat's going to stick with you in your head for several bars until you need to hear it again. It's like you're already bopping your head, ding, 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 ding.
Yeah.
And it's, you don't need to do anything to keep that groove going.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think just real quick, I think Maclaine touched on something really big is, a lot of times I'm thinking when I'm listening to music and, think about how I'm going to use it in the game. Is this 30 seconds just 30 seconds, or can I make this, a minute, 2 minutes? How much can that be used for a scenario where, this player is going to be going to be in this area where this music is playing. We want to keep it going, but we don't want it to be, so repetitive. Having an element like that was like, okay, I have, these 5, 6 different variations, and I have these different pads underneath, and then I can randomize that. That makes that's not just 30 seconds, that's, 2 minutes of music now of variety that will keep the player engaged and keep them wanting to listen to that music, rather than, this one piece of music playing again and again and again on loop, where that's where we get exhausting, and that's what we start seeing players going to be like, I'm going to turn the music down, because I'm trying to do a lot of stuff, and I'm keep on hearing the same, riff over and over again. Right? There's a danger in, in having your music being maybe a little bit too much of an earworm without any variation on it, where it calls itself out maybe in scenarios where you might not necessarily want the music to stand out. There's always places for that to happen, but you have to know, the time and place for that.
Yeah, that's some great thoughts. And I want to talk a little bit about just kind of demos and things like that, since we've been listening to a good number. Sometimes you may get a prompt that's quite specific, and it's important to kind of stick to that. Other times you may just get something that is calling for you to capture a certain quality or essence or vibe that they're going for, and then it's a little bit more open, outside of maybe just make sure it's under this amount of time. In that case, if you do have interesting ideas like this, where it's like, well, I do have something that's really catchy, and I want people to listen to this, it's my main idea, great, you can present that just as a track. But if you have ideas of like, well, I think I can make this really unique and interactive, and what if we did this? Well, there's nothing necessarily wrong with making a video that kind of demonstrates a little bit of like, oh, well, we do this, and then I crossfade that in, and this layer comes in. Shows a certain amount of understanding there, even if someone else on the other side may be doing it.
Cool. Well, let's take about a 15-minute break, use the restroom, refill coffee. I don't know if there's any pastries left, but there's definitely fruit over there. And we've got 3 pieces left, and then we'll do some follow-up panel questions. So I'll see you in about 15 minutes.
Right. Thanks.
Am I not wrong? Am I wrong?
I don't know. I think they have cheesecake there. This had cheese, this was like a cherry.
All right, I say it every time. It is great to see everybody socializing, and I promise there will be more time for that with food in a little bit. But we don't want to squander the amazing talent that we have up here and Kole out there. So if everyone wants to take their seats, and we will pick things up where we left off. We lost Kole. Cole's gone. I'm the moderator now.
I'm the captain now.
You got the reference. All right, so that's not cool. I'm going to go ahead and play things, and
Sure.
So here's our next full mix. All right, and our imminent danger version of that. And finally, our ambient version.
Apologies for being a little bit out.
No worries. You missed the full mix version, so we'll catch you up.
Anybody want to start? I think since I had heard the ambient there, I'd be kind of curious. This was one of the, I think maybe the first ones I heard without much percussion at all. Did anybody want to speak to that perhaps?
Sure. Yeah, I think that was probably the strongest ambient, that was an ambient track, it felt good. And it's difficult with something it's difficult to maintain, the harmonic progression and something like that that's a little active, especially because it keeps modulating and stuff, and while still maintaining an ambient feel. So I thought that was really effective. I would say that, again, the full mix and the imminent danger mix kind of just sounds like the same track. The imminent danger one just sounded like it was subtracting a couple things. And I think that to connect them, having the same chord changes in the ambient and the full mix version is a really good idea. And then maybe for the imminent danger one, you could just not have any chord changes, right? Just sort of lay a bed of something, maybe just on that first chord so that it's able to transition smoothly into the full mix. But instead of constantly having that circular chord progression go, just lay out for a little bit, vamp, as they say, just to more evenly define the two sort of states in the game. Just a suggestion. But I would say that, yeah, it probably needs to be a little bit different other than just muting a couple of layers. That would be my biggest suggestion. But I'm very impressed at how it was able to fit those chord changes, especially in such a short amount of time. Like this one actually had a nice fade out and all this other stuff. So to kind of meet the brief and let it feel like it was kind of breathing and existing in such a very short amount of time is very impressive.
Yeah, some really good thoughts. And kind of curious, Colin, was there anything in particular about thinking these layers and how they interact with one another, things that maybe stood out to you, things you changed?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with Maclaine that the fact that the full mix and the imminent could have had a little bit more difference between them. They sound just a little too similar to me. And when we're moving between two, phases of a game, we want to hear that change happening. It doesn't be like massively drastic, but it should be noticeable that something new is happening. Very similar with the ambient track, where I did like how it related to the other tracks. It's a little difficult to do it in the amount of time given, but again, I would love to see some more elements kind of coming in, even if it's just like a slight change sonically, just to give it a little bit more difference between, besides just playing the chords that you hear in the other tracks, even if that's just, adding a different pad or, sprinkling a little bit of the melody in there, just giving me a little bit of difference. But, if this was a 3-minute track, I'm sure you would eventually do that. So not too much of a concern, but I think something to keep in mind is that you do want, just because it's ambient doesn't mean that it's static.
Colin, I just want to play transitioning from imminent danger to full mix to hear how different they are. So I randomly chopped it, and so we'll see if we hear it. So it sounds like it's mostly just the drums that differentiate the two.
Can I give an example of maybe a sort of in-game example of what these 3 states might be like, just because so we're not talking in broader terms. Let me ask another question too. How many people here play video games? Okay. Because I don't know about you, but I get these questions all the time when I'm, especially in LA where so much is film and TV focused. I'll go to some event. Oh, you're a game composer. Do you play video games? I'm like, yeah. It's like, oh, you're a film composer. Do you watch movies? It's so strange. It's like, what a weird thing. But so, for instance, and this is maybe something that it was implied in the brief, and maybe could have been more explicit instead of implicit. I'm thinking of the Spider-Man games that came out for PlayStation, which are great games. There's all sorts of modes and music to fit these different modes. But some of the missions that you go on, you like infiltrate a building, maybe explore a room, looking for clues in certain things, and then you maybe hear voices in another room next door. You like jump into an air duct vent, and you have to crawl through and listen to some of the conversation, and then you drop down and face the bad guys. And that is kind of like the ambient, imminent danger, full mix mode, right? Like when you're exploring a room looking for clues, ambient music. You're in the vents, all of a sudden you hear bad guys talking like, hey, the Spider-Man's around. Oh, if we see him, let's get him. That's imminent danger, right? And then when you drop down and he makes a quip and says, hey, you idiots, I'm going to stick you to the wall or whatever. I'm a composer, I'm not a writer. That's when it becomes the full mix. So those 3 states are different, and they have to kind of build tension. And I think that what we've been saying about not having the imminent danger feel like more of the full mix. It doesn't set the tension. Like imagine how you would be feeling if you're Spider-Man up in this duct and you see the bad guy talking to his henchmen down there and say, oh my God, I got to drop down and kick these guys' asses. Musically, it has to reflect that, and I don't think just muting the drums, in this particular scenario is gonna work. It has to create tension. I mean, tension is the word that we use the most when describing these kind of states in the game. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Play those games, they're great. Great music implementation, too.
Ayriel, is there anything in particular that stood out to you about this as a creative director?
Yeah, sure. This might be a little spicy, and I'm going to put respectfully before I say what I say next. It didn't necessarily feel like a game song to me, look, I could hear this in the game, so that's why I'm saying respectfully. but it sounded like it was a real song, you know? And so when I'm thinking about applications for the music coming out of the game, I'm all like, oh, that's actually interesting because it opens up the opportunities for how I might present the game. So maybe instead of a standard like gameplay trailer, maybe we're treating that to feel a little bit more cinematic. Maybe it's a music video, like maybe it's something else because it feels like there's something more, I don't want to say, like, it doesn't feel like some of these songs, like you could be like, yeah, it feels reminiscent of this game or something like that, or it's a part of a level. But with this, it was like, oh, there's some 90s horror feel into it, and I could hear someone putting in a guitar, and I could feel it being in Scary Movie. Like, there's just things about it to where it makes me think about it on a broader level versus just so stagnantly into, like, games marketing, right? So I think that's an interesting opportunity of, like, yeah, sometimes songs can evoke other ways for us to potentially look at putting out a game depending on what that game is.
Yeah, that's a very good point. The original intent or purpose of a track may find life somewhere else, depending on your collaborator and some of the ideas that they have.
Can I just throw that to the musicians here and also to the audience? I should have specified earlier. Feel free to chime in if anybody has any comments or feedback of their own. But musically, what is it that Ayriel? I don't want to put you on the spot because I know you're not a musician, but for us musicians, what are the things that make it feel more song-like as opposed to more underscore-like?
Everybody's looking at me. I mean, having drums like that and guitars and things is just, musically speaking, mimics the form of a metal song or a rock song. It just sort of squarely exists in that zone, I would say. Although, and I agree that it is more song-like, and I could hear that in a trailer or a music video to sell the game. This can also be sort of genre-dependent because I've noticed, like, the game that I work on the most is a fantasy game and has big orchestral stuff, and you would never hear something like that in the game. But a lot of Japanese games, I've noticed, the Final Fantasy games, especially the modern ones, their combat music is just a song. It's like, It literally is just a song, and it sounds like that, except there'll be someone singing words over it. So it can be genre dependent, and that sometimes the company or the market they're selling to expects to hear that kind of thing. So it can be sort of genre and market dependent, if that makes sense. But I do think that drums plus guitar equals rock song,
Yeah, I do a lot of song work for games as well. And thinking about songs and score and everything, songs, I think if you're thinking in regards to arrangement, in regards to production, it is different. It doesn't necessarily need to be all the time because you do have cinematic songs that kind of blend between all of those different things. But if you think just in regards to you have a top line, you have a harmonic layer, some kind of chord structure, it is reminiscent of what we understand as pop form or structure. So we'll have verse, a pre, a chorus, things like that. Those different elements, that moves it more into the song world rather than score, which can be a little bit more abstract in form, or you could do an A, B, A prime, things like that. I think it's a mix of all of those different elements as a musician. If we want to evoke those kinds of feelings, it's a bit of researching, okay, what kind of sound or style do I want to make? A pop track? Do I want to make something that's reminiscent of 90s hip-hop? All right, understand how that sounds and the sound choice, and then let that inform how you write.
That makes sense.
Can I give a quick example of a game I recently have been playing that does, I think, a good mix of using actual songs in the game itself, where a lot of time I think people may think that's like a very separate thing, or like you're playing the song and then you're back to score. Is I've been playing a lot of Baldur's Gate lately, and there's this one section where you're moving on to a third act of the game, and they have the score that's kind of playing in this downtime area, and it's kind of playing really nice music. It's very chill, and then when you get to a certain place that kind of overlooks this next section of the game, they have it set like by bar, not bar by bar, but by like section of the song, will then kind of fade in, and it'll play the actual song. And it was a really neat bit of implementation where you don't immediately recognize that this is a song or that it will become a song until you hit this place where they want the player to really experience, the singing and the more song-like elements of it. And it's one of the few examples, I think recently that I've experienced where it's this mix of score and song, and it does it really effectively. So I wouldn't necessarily, I'd be like, there are a lot of different ways that you could incorporate song forms or more song-like elements into the score itself.
Yeah, shout out Borislav for Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah.
Great score.
BAFTA award-winning soundtrack. So a good soundtrack to study. Baldur's Gate 3, Baldur.
Cool. Anything else about this one, or should we move on? All right.
Yep.
Oh,
Great.
we have a. Oh,
Yeah,
nice job.
great. Thank you.
Carlos, good job. All right, here is our next full mix. You know what? I think this is actually meant to be a blend of all three stems. So I'm going to play them all.
Sorry, this is mine.
Oh,
I guess I must have misunderstood. So what we're calling full mix is layer 1 and layer 2.
well, I imagine it's all three of them in this case.
No, well, my understanding of the assignment was there are 3 layers. There's the ambient layer, there's the overcoming odds layer, and there's the combat layer. So, yeah, what I would call full mix is 1 and 2, combat is 1 and 3, and ambient is just 1.
Got it.
Okay.
So 1 and 2 is going to be full mix then, yes? All right. So good lesson for when you're not in the room with the people listening to your demo, needing to explain how to listen to it. All right. So here is full mix. And now for imminent danger, you said that was 2 and 3?
1 and 3.
1 and 3. Got it. And finally, ambient.
Cool. I thought this was a pretty cool example of just how these layers actually can work together in game. We're getting a direct representation of just how they could work. So on that note, Colin, perhaps we could chat a little bit about those layers.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when I heard that first track, I immediately thought like, okay, this is more like a scripted moment for like a Vista or like, you know, maybe even like a cinematic. It's something you hear that you want the player to really feel. And then maybe going into the ambient layer when you're, okay, we've had this Vista moment, we're seeing this amazing view, or we're in this new area of the game that really calls itself out, and then transitioning into that ambient when you're now exploring, going around. And so I felt those two elements work maybe not necessarily as a stacking on top of each other, but more of a horizontal handoff. I really like that. And then, yeah, it felt like all three versions of these tracks existed together and were very different elements. So yeah, I think it could definitely work very well in an interactive system because it gives a lot of freedom to move between them while still sounding like, you know, one connected piece of music.
Yeah, on that note, Maclaine, maybe could chat a little bit about, since we have a direct representation of how this could work in game, talking about the imminent danger layer and like how other ways that you could perhaps approach that or amplify it, augment it in ways that, depending on the game state, it maybe changes even more.
Yeah. So I thought that, it's not a contest, by the way, we're not giving out awards, but I thought that that was probably the closest to what I would expect to hear in a dynamic or imminent danger like tension layer. It really felt like what I would hear in a game, so I thought that was really great. I do think that it was probably a little too active with some of the sound effects, the flute chuffs and the waterphone sort of stuff. Like a little of that goes a long way, and that's the kind of thing that, you know, Colin or someone similar, you could just have a pool of those that you would sprinkle in. Again, I understand it's the assignment is to do something in 30 seconds, and so you know, we're sort of examining it from an unrealistic standpoint. But I did think that that was probably the most effective at setting what I would expect that mood to feel like in a game. I do think that you're probably going to need maybe a fourth layer of something to differentiate the ambient from the final thing. Or now this is actually for the ambient layer. This is a great way of this is something that you can mute something. You can pull something back. I personally would have pulled back the synth and just let this string tremolo sort of sound effect stuff fill in the gaps there. Because I thought that when I first heard the full mix, I was like, this isn't a full mix. But then I had the same vision of it being like a cinematic moment. I'm thinking of something like Naughty Dog does this so well in the Uncharted games and Last of Us. Of like, I'm thinking of a moment that is a massive spoiler, especially for the upcoming second season of The Last of Us, so I'm not going to give it away. But a moment where, you know, it's almost, you want it to be cinematic where everything drops away, right? Like, you know, and you're just fully in the head of the character at this really intense moment. I'm giving it away by even just doing my hand gestures for people who played the game know what that means. But yeah, so in a sense, if that's what the game needs, it can be very effective. It doesn't need to bigger, doesn't need necessarily mean better for like a full mix kind of thing. So yeah, I thought it was great. My of the three, my one biggest comment would be just the tone down some of the effects on the tension layer and then pull the ambient layer back even more to differentiate it from that full mix.
Yeah, some great notes. In regards to this track, I think this might have been one of the first or the first that had vocal somewhat featured. Ayriel, could you talk a little bit about maybe some of these different elements and some of the ones that maybe stood out to you?
Yeah, I think you kind of like hit the nail on the head, and I think everybody else is kind of, especially with Colin, like you get a clear sense of something when you hear those type of vocals on something, right? Like he said, the Vista. I myself went back to Gladiator, but maybe it's because I just binged all of them recently, right? Like you get a picture in your head, you're getting a moment, you know what people are trying to pull from you at that. So if the crummy marketer is going to sit here, I'm all like, depending on, you know, the creative director for the game and everybody else, what their propension is to like play around, I might develop a campaign that is full of misdirects maybe. And so potentially pulling out those voices to where immediately someone looking at an asset is going to be like, oh, I know what they're going to give me. But all of a sudden I give you someone being speared through the head or something like that. Like, it's like, oh, whoa, I wasn't expecting that level of gore, right? Or maybe I might have someone like crying somewhere, you know, like I could play with something to where you think it's going to happen, but it's not going to happen. I just might explain myself with misdirect. But that could be really fun just because of how like oh, you know what you're going to get with something like that. You know what to kind of expect, especially in games with something like that. So being a little different or kind of subverting those expectations is always something you can kind of pull out, especially with something like that. Oh, I said that a lot.
Yeah, that's a great note, and it kind of made me think a little bit about there are certain things, whether they be textures, sounds, musical gestures. We think about, minor seconds, and if you hear it in certain ways, it's reminiscent of maybe sharks. There's certain things that I think just exist within a lot of people's minds, and being aware of those, and it's like, do I want to evoke that? Do I not? Do I want to play against people's expectations? Pretty interesting. Any other thoughts?
I just had one one more reference, which is reminding me a little bit of Austin Wintory's score to Journey. Has some of those moments, especially with the vocals and sort of that vista.
Yeah.
But also just musically incredibly evocative and I mean, really wants to make me play the game. The only other note I would say is the ambient layer, I feel, is a little bit too static. Like something Maclaine said about one of the other demos earlier, is having more shape of that pad and texture, and just giving it more space, because right now it's kind of sort of going incessantly. I think that would make it more effective. I mean, how many times do we hear people say less is more, and we're like, no, more is more, but often less is more, because we get more bang for our buck when we take things out.
Yeah, absolutely. That just made me randomly think of something. This is my last thought. A fun little trick to do for big ambient pads or long things that I like is maybe you do have some motif, an ostinato, more likely a percussive pattern of some kind that plays a larger role somewhere else in the game. But if you're making an ambient version and you want that movement, there can sometimes be a pretty interesting effect if you sidechain whatever that pad sound is to the percussion that's happening. And now you're automatically getting a little bit of movement. You don't have to do it a ton. And it's not like a full-on LFO and you're cutting off every time it's playing a particular part of the pattern, but there's just something there. And then when you bring it back, it feels like it kind of had never been gone anyway.
You're talking about doing the ghost sidechain thing?
Yep.
Does everybody know what that is?
Yeah, but if you wouldn't mind enlightening us for those of
Cole brought it up. I feel like he should.
Well, tag team, tag
Okay.
in. So you can
Okay, people know what sidechaining is, right? It's usually used in electronic music, but basically triggering a compressor or volume duck based on a kick drum is usually what it does, just so that when that kick hits, it's like that's all you're hearing for that split second. You don't even perceive that the volume of literally everything else has been ducked while the kick is happening. And so ghost sidechaining is doing that, but muting the actual kick track so that the volume automation happens, but you ever hear the boom, 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 right? And so it can be a great way to add almost like a tremolo effect, right? But a more advanced than just having it be some regular waveform.
Yeah, and if you pick, I'm going to nerd out on this. If you pick like some kind of multiband compressor or an EQ or something, and then you attach there, now you can pick which frequencies are impacted by that as well, which is pretty exciting, because now it's like, okay, I actually want people to really notice this, so maybe I'll put it in the mids a little bit more. Do I want people to feel it a little bit more? Okay, then whatever's in the lows, maybe I do. There's a whole bunch of fun things you can do.
You can have a lot of fun with that.
Yep.
Basically, Daft Punk or Justice, it's like the kings of sidechaining. Yeah.
Was it chop when you're talking about flute chop?
Yeah, like overblowing it. That's sort of like where it brings out the harmonics. And it can, if it chuff is sort of an articulation, right? But it's like when you just go, like you literally just blow into the mouthpiece like that. But it's designed to have that kind of harmonic overtone, effect. Yeah.
I'm gonna try and do it real quick here, just to this track, to see if I can get it going in a few seconds here. We're here. Not hearing too much of it. it doesn't quite work here, but
A for effort.
yeah, figured it was worth a shot. So, and that's actually the last of the demo tracks.
Oh.
So
Wow.
we've got a little bit of time. Yeah. So, Parker, great, nice track. Before we do the panel discussion, anybody from the audience want to chime in with any thoughts? Yeah.
You don't need the mic on this.
Oh, I don't. Okay, great. Just a little thing. I noticed that two tracks, like initially, okay, so one track was using a dulcimer, right? And another piece was using like marimba, right? And those were really like nice and high quality samples. So I really liked the sound of those. What I think could be improved there would be if they would not sound that precise. So they were precisely, placed on the grid. They were aligned with the beat so precisely that it was immediately obvious that that was not the live instrument. Even though the quality of the instrument was really, really top notch. Those libraries were really, really, really good. So two things. I would randomize the placement on the time on the time axis, right? And another thing that could be done is to randomize the velocity. And that actually makes it more believable because those are clearly meant to sound like acoustic instruments, which means acoustic instruments are played by real people. And real people are not precise, right? Even the best musicians are not so precise as the machine would be, and that's the whole point, right? So that would actually improve it a great bunch. Because it was really interesting because in the second track there was this randomization or like this humanization was actually applied, but it was applied on the synthesizer, right? And the synthesizer was actually something which actually can be, precisely placed on the grid, because that's something that you would expect, right? Because that thing is like a MIDI. Yes, I'm a synthesizer. I'm a MIDI. But if you are like a live person, you should sound like a live person, right? And actually, this let's say humanization is what actually brings you further in the production, even if you don't have high quality samples, sample libraries, right? So if you don't have a high quality sample libraries but you want to sound live, make some randomization, right? And so you can automate EQ maybe, so that you would simulate the way how people are sort of like not entirely in the consistent position, related to where the microphone is, you're shifting when you're recording. So like simulate these kinds of things. That would actually help a bunch. Yeah.
That's a really good suggestion. And what I'll often do is instead of randomizing is actually play in the part. Don't tell anybody. Sometimes I slow down the tempo so I can play it more accurate, or quantize, but not to 100%. And so then you can get away with making mistakes and not make it perfect afterwards. But yeah, definitely. By the way, would you like to introduce yourself? For
Sorry, I'm out of work. I'm a technical music director at Thank you.
Great to have you.
Multi-million selling copy.
Yes, it's
our multi-million selling game.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's interesting, I agree with you, Adam, and adding that human element I think is important, while also having, if there is an element that you need to have locked in the grid to balance it, right? Everything can't be randomized. And yet, sometimes, there's a quote from Brian Eno, and I'm going to butcher it, but he basically talks about one generation's sort of technical defects in a process will become a style for a generation that was raised on that. And so there's people that, actively try to recreate, not just chiptune music, which is a recreation of an extremely limited way of producing music from, the 80s and early 90s, but even Super Nintendo and old, like lo-fi PlayStation 1 games, like you grow up like ingesting that, and that becomes, it's not just a limitation, whereas the person creating that music be like, I can't believe I can only create these iconic themes with 2 square waves, a triangle wave, and a noise channel, right? Well, then 20 years later, it's like, oh man, we got to get the original Game Boy with the chip, this one chip, the 8N302 or whatever, and make music that way. And so, so sometimes those sort of inhuman limitations can become again, it all depends on the context that the game is trying to present to the player.
I think it's really important to actually understand what is the essence of the instrument. What actually makes the instrument that instrument.
Yeah.
And emphasize that, right? So essentially, chiptunes are supposed to be out of tune, right? So if you remove this out of tuneness out of chiptunes, you don't have a chiptune, right? It doesn't have to be produced, using the original hardware, right? Because it's actually, they are becoming increasingly harder and harder to come by, right? Because they're getting broken and stuff. But yeah, so marimba is supposed to be, like when you do like 5 hits with my pen, they are the same sound, but every single instance sounds different, right? And that's sort of the essence of what that instrument would be. If you have congas, right? Another thing which actually sounded very MIDI-ish was that it was the same sample played throughout. So so this is where some kind of a how you call that when you have like multiple samples.
Round robin.
Round robin, exactly.
Right.
It's super important.
Right. And understanding the libraries you're working with, and knowing when the library takes care of that for you, and when you have to step in to help.
Yeah.
So, by the way, you Adam, you're making your conducting debut in just over a week, March 1st. Jose, do you want to say something about?
Sure, I'd love to.
Yeah.
So, in case you don't know, I'm also the music director and founder of the Game Music Ensemble at UCLA, a massive 100-piece orchestra with a big choir as well, and a jazz band as well. And we're going to be performing music from Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 and 1, what we're calling the medieval suite. The concert will be focused primarily on what we're calling the battles and ballads of games. So we're going to have some war music, but we're going to have some peasant music. It's called music that you go to a wedding to and frolic and get excessively drunk. And I think Adam's music really incorporated that into that game, which I highly recommend. It was one of my favorite games. Part 1 was one of my favorite games of all time. And when I got to meet Adam at the Composers Summit in Prague last year, I think it was, I was just thrilled to invite him in. He flew, I think, 2,000 miles. You live in San Jose now, but on top of that, you drove 5.5 hours to be here. So really happy to have you.
Hey, Jose.
Jose, that concert's going to be here or UCLA?
It's going to be at UCLA. Let me turn myself on here. It's going to be in Schoenberg Hall, March 1st, 7 p.m. at the music school. So type in UCLA Schoenberg Music Building, 7 p.m. The show is sold out. It's sold out in a week, unfortunately. But talk to me. I got a few VIPs seats, and everyone here is a VIP. So happy to invite you. So talk to me afterwards.
Knows how to hook people up. So this is why you come in person to our events. For the yes, cool. So anything else from the audience, and then we have a few minutes to hear from our panel. All right, let's hear from our panel.
All right, great. Thank you everybody for submitting. It was great listening to everything. Hope we provided some helpful thoughts and feedback, a variety of different perspectives here. I think what we'd like to do now is just talk about game music, the industry itself, demos, things like that. So I'm just going to ask some questions, and then any of our panelists, if you have thoughts, feel free to jump in. And otherwise, I might direct a little bit more. But I'm curious, on the topic of demos, before we move on to some other things, what are some qualities that, in your mind, make a really impactful demo? Perhaps from the perspective of making them and from the perspective of listening. We've already listened to a whole bunch, but perhaps there's a couple things in particular that we haven't discussed. Any thoughts?
Sure. This is not something that I think a lot of people want to hear because it means spending money, but you have to present the best sounding demo possible, because if you don't, there's 50 other people that have submitted as well that have, right? We all want to impress everyone with our musical brilliance and our chops and hope that we can, I mean, I've heard demos that are just Sibelius outputs, that it's brilliant writing, but it sounds amateurish, right? And this person probably has a higher level of education in composition than I do. But I know that one of my own strengths is I'm really good at making realistic sounding mock-ups. And I think I can say the same for Kole, I'm sure, and probably a lot of people in this room. But you can't trust the person listening to be able to listen through crappy samples. I mean, you just can't. And so whatever means you have to invest in your sample libraries and your hardware that can run them effectively, you got to do it because everybody else is. And you have to compete. If you want to work on projects at that level, you have to compete with everybody else that wants it. And that includes me and Kole. So, we're going to work hard to make our stuff sound real. And that it only starts with composition and orchestration. Electronic music production, mixing, mastering, you have to know all that stuff. It's really important. That's a great point. Production, I think, more than I ever could have thought when I was studying composition at school, became more and more important. And sometimes, things you may not have access to all of these different samples or things like that. So investing in just the way you treat and the way you approach productions and say, all right, my strength lies in this area. So let me lean into that. Let me say, okay, I don't have, $10,000 worth of the best string libraries and brass and all that stuff, but I got a handful of really good things, and I play a certain instrument that I can then, it's like, all right, that's going to feel infinitely better, and then maybe eventually you can afford the other things. But that's kind of how I started as well. Is like I listened to other people's demos when I was early on. And I'm like, they're really good at that. And so part of it is they have better samples. Part of it is I didn't have the experience producing and making those sounds. So leaning into my strengths is I'm a guitarist. So bringing in different instruments and live elements like that can really help. And then focusing on making it sound the best way that you can, using unique ways of treating plugins as creative tools like an EQ or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But outside of that, for demos, talking about presentation, when listening to a demo, what are you listening for? How long do you listen to them for? Ayriel, if there's anything in particular you could chat about on that.
Maybe I'll be too truthful with this and it'll be, career limiting move, so I apologize. I have the attention span of every common man right now, so I'm not listening to demos for a very long time. I would also have to say maybe there's been a world to where I've been spoiled to where the demos coming in are probably around the range of the assignment that we're looking to do. Like they're being curated before it is even getting to me, right? And so I'm not necessarily sifting through what potentially some other people are sifting through, like 20s or 100s or directly sourcing. I'm kind of getting maybe 5 of them, right? And they're kind of in the pocket for the project that I'm looking to work on. So if I'm getting something that has been highly curated and it's coming to me, then I'm kind of listening for, like, what's the hook, right? What are the voices? What is the bass that is really dope? Like, I'm looking for something that feels like either it's so on pocket that's all like, oh yeah, undeniably, that's like the thing, that's the sound, right? Or it's so defiantly against it to where I'm all like, oh, that's a bet. You know what I'm saying? Like we could do something that feels like interesting like that, and that becomes like my sell at the end of the day. So again, I think I might have had a bit of a different experience coming with demos. So it's a little less talking about quality because it feels as though those demos have been coached to a point to where they are meeting my layman's ears, and I'm kind of only looking at it from a creative sensibility versus from, is it technically proficient? Is the right voices on there? Like those are things where like, I know the voices aren't going to be right on there, right? Which you get into some other sticky problems of being all like, well, why'd you take that girl's voice off of it? Hers was better than the dude you put on here. It's like you go through the whole entire process and you're like, damn, I miss that girl. But it just happens that way. So, take that with a grain of salt, when it kind of gets to those eras or this sector of time. So yeah, sorry if I couldn't be a little bit more helpful in that.
Oh, that's good. That's good. And you're talking about curated demos and everything. Talking a little bit about that, perhaps on the interactive side of things. Is there anything in particular you're listening for when you're listening to a demo to say, if something is very curated, it's for this. All of them sound actually quite good and very much within the expected instrumentation and things like that. Is there anything as a music designer you're listening to which helps you say, oh, okay, I can hear or see a little bit more of what I can do with this?
Yeah, so, from my perspective, most of my experience comes from, after we get that demo, and we'll be working with, you're already hired, now we're listening to the demos you're submitting to, going to be eventually put in the game and making edits based on that. Like, you have the job, but, there's always going to be demos, there's always going to be, every new track you present is going to go through this process of feedback and adjustments. And, to your point, I think when I'm involved in that process and listening, I'm always thinking of like, okay, how for what we need this to be, how well can this be expanded upon? How well can this be used as an interactive element? And usually like when you're demoing, like it's not like you're doing a lot of feedback sessions, but once you have the job and that piece of music is constantly being looked at and reviewed and adjusted, I think your ability to take feedback on things that may not necessarily always be like, just the track itself, but what the track could be used for is really important. Your ability to be like, if someone be like, it'd be nice if I could have, another synth element so that we can play with this, you not being like, oh, I don't want to add anything to this, like understanding the way the music will be used and being open to that kind of feedback is, I think, really important because it allows us to have a good relationship and allows us to kind of get the best music for the product, for the video game.
Yeah, that you just talked a little bit about collaboration. I'd like to talk a little bit more about that. Music and making games is a very collaborative process, and I'm curious, what are some of the things that you look for in a music collaborator, whether hiring, whether working alongside someone, whether directly working with their music as well, on what are some of the qualities of that person that you look for to have a really, really solid collaboration?
I might actually have that one. I know everyone says like innovation, but I find that to be like proactive ingenuity in whatever space that you're in. So if I just came off of saying that my experience in some places have been kind of curated, on top of that, the people, when I've created music in my career, I have sought those people out. Like, I basically was either referred to somebody or I saw someone doing something and I was like, yo, that's really dope. That fits here. Remember I told you we kind of keep a little bag of people we enjoy, right? I have like a TikTok category that is filled with producers and DJs and all these people for which I am just kind of waiting and biding my time for it. So there was a thing that we did for Valorant to where we were doing this animation and it needed to be a very specific tone because we were chasing some Aeon Flux 90s, type of vibe, right? And I wanted to kind of create a theme song similar to Aeon Flux for this particular agent. And so we sought out and got referrals on this like one dude who basically was like in the pocket when it came to like this type of tonality. He had a level of experimentation with inside of this, I don't want to say genre, but he was kind of ranged and he looked like he knew how to move, instrumentation in a very like strong way. And in fact, he did. And it was a very joyful experience to kind of be working with that. So from that, I would say it's like knowing that you're partnered with somebody who at least comes off like they know what they're doing, right? Because I didn't know this man from Job, but when we got into our conversations, I felt like I could trust him. He was able to take someone like me who was like a layman and kind of like work through my hand gestures and me making sounds out of my my mouth and like actually articulate that into something that actually turned out to be dope. So I think a level of like kindness, for people who are not born inside of that space, right? And then just having like talent, a proactive talent to be able to be like, okay, I know what you want to do. Now let me give you that unique shape of that because I'm not looking to copycat, but I do want to invoke a sense of like familiarity in that particular piece. And so he was able to meet us with the terms of the product that I was looking to put this on, so.
Cool.
Yeah, I was going to say that I've said this to a lot of people that have asked me similar questions, or students or something, but like we think of ourselves, or I think of myself as a composer, right? And that means that's my art. I'm an artist. I'm a musician. That's my art form. in the context of a collaborative endeavor, you're not an artist, you're a problem solver, right? The problem is we're making a game, it doesn't have music. Okay, well, I come in and solve that problem, and that's how you get hired. You know, the audio director has to manage so many different things and report up to the creative director and the head of the studio. He's got the problems that we got to get VO in the game, we got to get sound effects, we got to get music, so you get to solve that problem. And so if I'm expanding my team, then that means that I have problems that I can't solve, right? So like, for instance, on one of the so the game I work on all the time is called Guild Wars 2, and one of the expansions we did, like almost a decade ago, had a kind of pseudo North African, Moroccan kind of feel to it, and I shouldn't say this publicly, but I've done it enough that most people know. I'm not very good at writing combat music, and I also don't find it very interesting, so I don't do it if I can avoid it. Which means, hey, that's a self-created problem, by the way. But I need to solve that problem. I need to hire somebody to write combat music. And I had met another composer named Will Roger, who has, you know, he was already doing very well then. Now he's sort of in the stratosphere. Incredible composer, incredibly nice person. And I had dinner with him a few times when we were both living in Seattle. And he just casually said, I'd like to send you some stuff. Great, sure, I'd love to hear it. And he'd worked on a game called Tomb Raider, Temple of Osiris, or something Temple, something Osiris. He fooled me. He fooled me in that I thought it was live instruments. He's like, no, it's all mock-ups, and we overdubbed like a horn and a trombone on it. So I thought, okay, that's impressive. And then also, the tone of the music was exactly what I was looking for. So when I needed to have combat music for this particular Guild Wars expansion, I wrote to him. I said, "Hey man, are you available? I could use your help on something." And he goes, "Sure. Send me some reference and what are you looking for?" And I said, "I'm not going to, because just do what you did for that Tomb Raider game, but do it for me, and then we'll get to record it live." So when I'm looking for someone to, as a collaborator, they have to solve a problem, whether it's one that I've created or one that I'm in charge of solving. And yeah, when you're in the trenches, it really is important to know that you can trust the people that are next to you. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. There are a number of things that can go differently during game development, and having partners that feels like a really strong team that you can rely on is absolutely key. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, if I could quickly speak to it too, from a different perspective, doing more technical stuff, it's boring, but I live and die by the spreadsheet and by, organization. And so for me, when it comes to collaboration, consistency in your ability to, give me, present assets to, the last thing I want to do, like I said before, like I'll grumble, but I'll kind of do it. But like the last thing I want to do is chase you down because you named something and I don't know what this means, or you sent me for the third time stems that aren't properly parsed out. Like if I have to message you like, hey, just so you know, we need to have the strings and the bass drum separate. For me, that's like a big thing because again, we're working with all these assets, working on a timeline of like, we need to get this done so that we can go record later on, and we have a small window to do this. Your ability to be organized and your ability to be easy to contact and to just, all I want to do is I want to take your great music and put it in the game, and it becomes difficult if you yourself are not organized. And so that's kind of the business aspect of being a good collaborator is, having all your ducks in order and being, not having to be chased down to do things, because that's not a fun experience. And, when you're working with someone over the course of a couple of years, that adds up a lot, especially when, you're a couple months or even like a full year out from ship, and I'm running around. The last thing I want to be like, what does, combat 3 _ V7 _ V12 mean? I don't have time for that.
Final.
Yeah.
Yeah, all caps, final, for real.
Yep. JK. Okay. That's a great point. Organization, keeping track of everything. It's key to being a good partner, especially when you have so many different musical assets you'll be working with. Mm-hmm. So we have time for maybe a question or two more, and then we can do a little Q&A.
I think one more question. We'll open up for quick questions because we don't want to keep Jose too long.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. He lives here.
All right, well, the last question I'll ask is a pretty big one, and it's more career-centric, where I'm just curious, what have you done, maybe continuously throughout your career, maybe one thing that has really helped you move forward to reach your goals? It could be anything, but just thinking throughout your career, is there anything in particular that you've done, whether it's consistent action or one thing in particular, that you can think back on that has been very valuable?
Yeah, I will make you speak first again. I think for me, by nature, I'm a much quieter person, and, if I had my way, I'd probably be inside all the time. But that's not a good way to build a career, and I don't necessarily think the work I do is so stupendous that it can stand for itself isolated without anyone knowing who I am. And so I made it a point very early on in my career to force myself to go out, to meet people, to connect, to go to events like this, and to follow up, and not just with them on a career, but on like a person-to-person. Like if I met you at Game SoundCon and we had a fun conversation about like your dog, I want to remember that, not just because it's a business and whatever, but because I actually want to care about you as a person and I want to see how you're doing. And I think keeping those human connections has always helped me, not necessarily to get a job, though sometimes it's happened where 3, 4, 5 years down the line it comes to that, but just being involved in the community and being a good person in the community. And I found that that has helped me with these connections. I can speak to one example is, like I said, I had that internship at PlayStation, and it was great. I loved it. And years down the line, I was looking for my next job, and I ended up, I was reached out to to work on the Halo games. And it just so happens that the music director was like the person who was like the lead audio engineer at PlayStation. And when we talked about it, he's like, yeah, I know you know the methods I want, and you worked hard during the time, and you made an effort to have a conversation with me, and it made that process to get that job a lot easier, rather than if I kind of went with my base instinct and just kind of kept my head down and not talk to anyone. And it's easy to do that, but I think you'll have a more fulfilling career if you reach out and actually interact with people.
Absolutely.
These events are good practice for that.
Yeah.
We're all intimidated by talking to others, so don't be afraid, and then we can venture out of our shells and do the same on an expanded level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I think on a level, we're all trying to make something that hopefully people love, and that's something that connects us. Maclaine?
Sure. I have many thoughts about this, but something we were talking about during the break about, which actually sort of tags onto what you were saying, is be interested in people. People make these things, whether it's film or television or movies. I'm sorry, film, television, or games, or interactive exhibits or whatever. Just making things. It's hard, and when you're doing it, you want to be doing it with people that you like. And it's surprising to me how casual certain connections can get made. And it's not. This art is not a meritocracy. Like commercial art is not a meritocracy, unfortunately. So I have to want to like the people that I'm going to be working with, and I think that you don't want to make people feel like you're only interacting with them as a transactional thing. I love games, and I'm a fan of games. I'm a fan of game composers, and I have like an encyclopedia of this stuff, mostly because I feel inadequate compared to all these other people who are my friends who are out there doing brilliant work, and I want to support them. So yeah, be enthusiastic and be interested in the people and the medium, and then also in your craft, right? Like I've been doing this now for a long time. This is my 13th year as just a composer, and I've been in games for 16 at this point. And I still feel like I'm just starting the race, and I've done some pretty cool things that I think a lot of people would like to do, but I only see the things that I haven't done yet that I want to work towards. I'm always working towards something. Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Ayriel?
I guess I'll segue off of that, and this is going to sound bad. I keep a heavy chip on my shoulder. You know what I'm saying? Like, this shit is not easy, and it has not been easy. And even though I have been able, and I will eventually work with a therapist to recognize what I have contributed, I still think there's so much that I want to do, and so far I want to go, and so many people doing awesome shit, and I just want to do awesome shit, and I just feel like I haven't done any of that. And so, that's probably been my main driver, and I'm not saying that's a driver for everyone, or nor do I give out advice to say that, because this is just how I keep myself motivated and keep myself like continuing to grow and continuing to hone in on the stuff that I really love, which is gaming, pop culture, and everything that's kind of revolved around it, and trying to, really make an impression in this space. And I want to be known one day for doing really great and like time-tested work. So that's kind of the thing that keeps me going, is every naysayer, every boss that looked at me with a crooked eye telling me that I couldn't do it or was never going to be a designer. I got that in my college, and I also got that when I was in my career. And luckily enough, some of those people are in the dirt now. GG. But there's still many more people I have to, make them eat their words and bury. So yeah, a heavy dose of chip on shoulder keeps me going. Yeah. Despite this good one.
All right. Cool. I think that. Thank you all for your interest, by the way.
Well, yes. Thank you to the panel. Before we thank them all together, I want to ask if there are any last questions from the audience. Yep.
Well, thank you for coming here and sharing all this excellent feedback. First of all, when I was reading about, the requirements, one of them, of course, production, that's a given, but sonically unique, or it was something like that, It seems to me that these days that's so hard to come about, because in some way or another you probably heard something that is similar to whatever we can provide or submit. My question is, sometimes we want to learn a wide range of skills, so we can provide different stuff, so it will fit whatever the let's say the idea or conception that the person, director, has in their mind. But you also try to find for your unique voice, your own voice. Is it your recommendation that you pursue that uniqueness? Has it ever been a case that you listen to something that might not fit, but you say, you know what, this caught my attention, I'm gonna put it aside because I know that it's gonna come back to me and use it in a different project, or something that it might be also coming down in the workflow. That's my question, basically. If you keep track of things that were memorable for you, or you put it maybe in a folder.
Yeah, it's a balance, right? Because this is collaborative, and we come in at the end typically. So we're always in the service of someone who's had the vision before us. In an ideal world, you get involved in that creative process as early as possible, but that's not always possible. So, you want to make sure that the person who's paying you to do the job is happy first, and then you're happy second, and sometimes, it's like a one for me, one for you sort of thing. I like to, I think a voice or stuff that I at least like doing, but then sometimes I got to write some combat music, and to me it just feels like cool. It's octatonic scale, 150 BPM, bang the taikos on the downbeat, great. They'll be happy with that. And to me it's very functional, But sometimes you do have something that you really believe in, and it's not a good fit for a project. And yeah, I set those aside. And actually, again, I can't talk about this too publicly, but very soon, something that I finished up last year will be announced and is coming out slightly after the announcement, but soon. And the main theme is actually it's the third time I pitched this demo. In fact, I pitched it once at Riot. Didn't even get a call back after the first the first submission. But yeah, it was originally for an indie studio that went under, so I'm glad that they didn't take it under with them. Then I pitched it to Riot, didn't get the job. And then this new thing came around, and I've been sitting on it for like 7 or 8 years. And I thought, this is a good idea. And I think that this is finally the time to like unleash it. And it worked, right? It got me the gig. And it's changed a little bit, but the essence of it is still exactly the same. So yeah, I had a thing that came out in the last Guild Wars expansion I did last year that was a pitch for a Beyblade animated, like an anime show on, I don't even know what channel it was on, but like, I recycle stuff all the time. Work smarter, not harder, Yeah. Sure.
I'm gonna tag onto that and say, as an artist, always try and be true to your voice. When you're composing for a project, yes, you need to adapt to what the project is, and it's not about your music as much as we want to believe that it is. But at the end of the day, you're more likely to get hired because you're Carlos and not because you can sound like Hans Zimmer or whoever you're trying to sound like. But at the same time, I mean, part of the reason we do this is because we always want to be growing and discovering new things, and I mean, that's the amazing thing about music and art, and the scary thing is that process never ends. There's never a point where we're like, all right, we know everything. There's nowhere left to explore. So whether your voice is what it is now doesn't necessarily mean that's what's going to be in 5 or 10 years. So keep honing that. So I want to thank Kole and all the panelists. This was fantastic. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, ASA and everybody.
Colin, Maclaine, Ayriel. I want to thank everybody who submitted, whether or not you took credit publicly. It was awesome, and the harsher the criticism, the better, because ultimately we learn more from what doesn't work than from what does. So kudos for not being afraid to put your work out there. This is sort of the next evolution of our adventures in listening that we've done for years, and so we'll have more events coming up. But keep working on your music. Just a couple quick announcements. Once again, check out membership if you haven't joined already. You should, at least for the free membership, or for higher than that. If you can volunteer, please do so. We have a great community of volunteers. We've got a bunch of events coming up. In 2 weeks, we're doing an online study of The Incredibles, Michael Giacchino's score. That's with Norman Ludwin, who used to run the East Side Revel. So that should be a lot of fun. March 8th, 10 a.m. March 29th, here we're doing, we're going to be talking about the new Snow White score with composer Jeff Morrow and his orchestrator, Jordan Siegel, who this is Jordan's first solo orchestration gig after working with Tim Davies for many years. In a month from then, April 26th, we've got Eric Desiderio, speaking of video game music. He's going to be talking about his music to the last Epoch, which is a huge success, and he actually did his own debut with the UCLA video game music ensemble last year. So it's been an event long in the making, and we're finally happy to have him join us. So please do join us for that. That's April 26th. And we've got a bunch more in the works that we'll be announcing soon. So definitely stay tuned. And finally, we have lunch. So please stick around for lunch, talk. Hopefully everyone from our panel will be able to stick around at least a little bit and get a chance to say hi to them. And we'll see you soon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.